Picture a general standing outside his command tent somewhere in France, the summer of 1944. The war is loud and close, artillery rolling in the distance, dispatch riders kicking up dust on a dirt road behind him. He reaches under his battle jacket and checks the weight of the pistol on his hip. It isn't the elegant little Colt the Army issued him. It's a full-sized .45, heavy as a short iron bar, blue steel warm from his body heat. He knows exactly what it can do. He's counting on it. That small, personal decision, made by dozens of America's most experienced combat commanders during the Second World War, tells us something that no official regulation ever could. The pistol a general chose to carry, above and beyond what the Army put in his hands, was a declaration of intent. It was the difference between a man who expected to be near the fighting and a man who didn't. If you want to understand the psychology of the American warrior leader, the story of why so many generals quietly set aside the Colt 32 general officer's pistol and reached instead for the M1911A1 is one of the most revealing chapters in American military history. And if you find that kind of story worth knowing, if you believe the details of how wars were actually fought matter, then subscribe to this channel and stay with us. This one is worth your full attention. The Army's decision to issue general officers a dedicated sidearm began formally in early 1944. Before that, generals had largely carried whatever they liked: their own revolvers, privately purchased automatics, captured enemy weapons, or nothing at all. General Dwight Eisenhower, for instance, rarely carried a pistol in the field. Omar Bradley typically wore a standard-issue M1911. George Patton carried what he considered appropriate for any given occasion, which usually meant one of his ivory-handled revolvers. The idea behind a standardized general officer's pistol was straightforward: give flag officers a recognizable badge of rank, something more refined than the thick-gripped service automatic carried by every sergeant and corporal in the Army. The weapon chosen was the Colt Pocket Hammerless, specifically the model 1908 in .380 ACP where available, and the older model 1903 in .32 ACP when the .380 supply ran short, which happened quickly. The Colt Pocket Hammerless was, by any standard, a beautifully made pistol. Designed by John Moses Browning in 1899 and produced by Colt from 1903 to 1945, it was a masterpiece of compact engineering. The concealed hammer, that's what hammerless referred to, a hammer hidden inside the slide, gave the pistol a smooth, snag-free profile. It weighed less than 2 pounds fully loaded. It slid easily into a coat pocket or a dress holster. The finish was deep blue or parkerized steel, often engraved with the recipient's name and rank, presented in a fine leather case with gold-tone hardware. Everything about it said authority and distinction. It was, to borrow a phrase, a gentleman's pistol. And that was precisely the problem. The men who most needed that pistol to actually work, the combat commanders, the generals who led armored columns through hedgerow country, who jumped with paratroopers, who spent days within range of enemy infiltrators, had developed a clear and well-reasoned opinion of the .32 ACP cartridge. That opinion was not favorable. The .32 ACP round, designed by Browning himself in 1899, fires a 71-grain bullet at roughly 900 feet per second. It generates approximately 128 foot-pounds of muzzle energy. Those numbers mean something when you compare them to what the .45 ACP delivers. A 230-grain bullet at around 850 feet per second, generating approximately 370 foot-pounds at the muzzle. The .45 hits with nearly 3 times the energy. It creates a significantly larger wound channel. In the language that American ordnance had already worked out through decades of hard experience, the .45 was a cartridge designed to stop a man. The .32 was designed to discourage one. The distinction matters most at the ranges where a pistol actually gets used. A sidearm is not a long-distance weapon. It is drawn when the threat is close, inside a room, in a trench, in the dark of a bombed-out building. At those distances, the first shot may be the only shot that matters. A cartridge that creates a small wound channel and transfers modest energy into a target demands that the shooter place that bullet precisely. Under stress in the dark, with an enemy already in motion, that is a demanding requirement. The .45, with its larger diameter and heavier projectile, created a more substantial wound regardless of exact placement. That margin, small in a laboratory, enormous on a battlefield, was exactly what experienced officers understood when they thought about what they needed from a sidearm. That distinction traced back to blood. In the Philippine insurrection at the turn of the century, American soldiers had gone to combat armed with 38 long Colt revolvers and discovered to their horror that Moro warriors, some of them drugged, some of them simply fanatical, could absorb multiple 38 rounds and keep coming. The Army temporarily recalled 45 Colt single-action revolvers from storage just to give its men something that would end a fight. The lesson entered the institutional memory of the United States Army and never left. In 1904, the Army convened Colonel John T. Thompson, later famous for the submachine gun, and Major Louis Lagarde of the Medical Corps to settle the caliber question scientifically. Their tests on cadavers and animals at the Chicago stockyards were methodologically crude by modern standards, but their conclusion was unambiguous. A pistol for military service should be no smaller than .45 caliber. Army ordnance formally concurred. The result was the M1911, adopted in March of that year, and the .45 ACP cartridge that fed it. That institutional knowledge did not evaporate when a general received a presentation case containing a small blue pistol in 1944. For men who had studied those lessons, who had served in an army that chose the .45 for documented and specific reasons, the issued .32 carried a kind of philosophical contradiction. You were being given, as a symbol of your authority over life and death, a weapon the Army had already decided wasn't powerful enough. The record of what generals actually did with their issued pistols is telling. Rock Island Auctions research, drawing on Harold Greeley IV's study of general officers' pistols, found that many commanders did not mention firing the issued weapon in combat and openly described it as a social weapon. One general wrote directly, he had given away the .380 Colt the Army issued him to a lieutenant colonel in his command and carried his personal commercial .45 instead. His reasoning was simple, and he stated it plainly. He did not consider the issued pistol a good weapon compared to the M1911. The language, social weapon, is remarkable. It suggests these men understood perfectly what the Colt Pocket Hammerless was and was not. It was appropriate for ceremonies, for staff meetings, for the formal life of a headquarters. It was a pistol you wore because your rank required it. Whether it could actually save your life in a close-quarters emergency was a secondary concern, unless, of course, you were the kind of general who regularly put himself where close-quarters emergencies happened, and many of them were exactly that kind of general. Omar Bradley carried the M1911 when he was near the front. Generals like Ridgely Gaither, who jumped into combat during Operation Varsity in March 1945, the Rhine crossing, carried both his issued .380 Colt and an M1911, and reportedly used both when his unit landed near a German 20mm gun position. The .45 was there because the man carrying it understood the difference between a pistol that might stop a threat and one that almost certainly would. Patton, characteristically, carried whatever he judged appropriate for his personal survival and his public image, sometimes simultaneously. His famous ivory-handled revolvers were in .45 long Colt and .357 Magnum, not .32. He was issued the Colt 1903 in August 1944, and by all accounts treated it as the administrative matter it was. The record of Patton's personal arsenal is, in its own way, a window into how seriously a combat general thought about the tools of his trade. He carried a Colt single-action Army in .45 long Colt, a Smith & Wesson registered Magnum in .357, a Model 1908 in .380, and on at least one occasion used the .380 to shoot at a German aircraft strafing his headquarters in North Africa. That last detail has passed into legend. What it actually demonstrates is a man who was armed, always, with something he was willing to bet his life on. Not a presentation piece, not a badge, a weapon. The .32 ACP Model 1903 the Army issued him in 1944 was received, logged, and largely set aside. It was not what Patton reached for when he expected to need it. The physical weight of the M1911A1, just over 2.5 pounds loaded, was frequently cited by officers as a reason not to carry it. At nearly 3 times the weight of the issued Colt, it required a proper holster, a proper belt, and it made itself known with every step. For a general spending his days in a jeep, at a map table, in a command post well behind the lines, that weight was a genuine inconvenience with no operational payoff. But for the general who expected to be somewhere that inconveniences could get you killed, the weight carried a different meaning. It was a constant physical reminder of what he was asking of himself. Every time he felt that slab of steel on his hip, every time he reached for it and confirmed it was there, he was confirming a commitment. He was not playing at command. He was arming himself for the possibility of contact. There is a pattern in military history, consistent across cultures and centuries, of leaders who carry heavy weapons as a conscious signal, to themselves as much as to their men. The weight is part of the message. It says, I am prepared for what this actually is. The M1911A1 carried that message. The Pocket Hammerless did not. The psychological dimension went beyond the individual general. In a command culture where soldiers watched everything their leaders did, where the way a man walked, what he wore, and what he carried communicated volumes about his seriousness, the choice of sidearm was never purely personal. General officers who were visibly armed with a serious combat weapon signaled to their troops that they understood the reality of the situation. It was part of what military historians call command presence, the quality that makes soldiers believe their leader is genuinely with them, not merely managing them from a safe distance. Patton understood this intuitively, which is why he curated his personal armament with as much deliberate attention as his uniform. His revolvers were theatrical in their presentation, the ivory grips, the engraving, but they were also real fighting weapons in serious calibers. That combination, theater and lethality together, was the point. The generals who quietly replaced their issued .32s with personal .45s were making a quieter version of the same statement. They were telling anyone who cared to notice that they did not expect the war to stay at a comfortable distance. The institutional recognition of what these men had known privately came in 1972. The Army's supply of Colt M1903 and M1908 pistols had finally been exhausted. Rather than find another compact weapon to continue the tradition of a lightweight gentleman's sidearm, the Army went in the opposite direction. Rock Island Arsenal took standard-issue M1911A1 pistols and modified them, shortened barrel, refined finish, high-profile sights, chrome-plated muzzle, and issued the resulting M15 General Officer's pistol to flag officers going forward. It was, in .45 ACP, the full-power cartridge that combat generals had been carrying on their own authority for 30 years. The Army had finally officially acknowledged what experienced officers had understood all along. The M15's Wikipedia entry puts the reason plainly. It was adopted to give officers a weapon with greater stopping power and effectiveness over previously issued sidearms. Greater stopping power. Those two words carry the weight of everything this story is really about. The Colt Pocket Hammerless was never a bad pistol. In its intended context, concealed carry by civilian plainclothes officers, intelligence operatives, dignitaries requiring discreet protection, it was excellent. The OSS issued it widely. The FBI used it. Bonnie Parker carried 2 of them. For a weapon you needed to conceal completely, draw without snagging, and employ in sudden close quarters without the bulk of a service pistol, the Pocket Hammerless was genuinely well designed for its purpose. Its purpose simply was not the purpose of a general officer in a theater of war where the enemy was known to specifically target command personnel. German infiltration operations, particularly in the later stages of the European campaign, were a documented threat to rear area headquarters. The Battle of the Bulge, launched in December 1944, included organized German commando teams, Skorzny's Operation Greif, specifically directed to penetrate American lines in American uniforms and kill or capture senior officers and disrupt communications. A general who understood that reality was not choosing a social weapon. He was choosing a fighting weapon, and the fighting weapon was the .45. What this story ultimately reveals is something larger than a caliber comparison. It reveals a distinction between two kinds of officer, one who understood his rank as insulation from danger, and one who understood it as responsibility to share that danger. The pistol was a diagnostic. You could look at what a general carried and get a reasonable read on which kind of man he was. The generals who strapped on their own .45s alongside or instead of the issued Pocket Hammerless were making a statement about their relationship to the men they commanded. They were saying, "I am going where this might matter. I am not trusting my life to a weapon that was chosen for its elegance. I am trusting my life to the same cartridge that John Thompson insisted on 40 years ago after he saw what happens when a pistol isn't powerful enough." There is a direct philosophical line from the mud of the Philippine insurrection in 1899 to a general officer's hip holster in France in 1944. That line is drawn in .45 caliber. Every combat general who understood the history of the army he served knew exactly where that line led and chose to stand at the end of it. The tradition endures. In October 2018, General Scott Miller, the final commander of Operation Resolute Support in Afghanistan, drew his sidearm when a Taliban gunman attacked a meeting in Kandahar. He was carrying an M1911, not a ceremonial pistol, not a social weapon, a fighting pistol, worn by a man who understood that rank is not armor. Some things in the history of the American military do not change. The understanding that a leader's weapon reflects his expectations is one of them. The .45 is heavy. That weight has always been the point. If this history matters to you, if you believe that the decisions made by real men in real wars deserve to be told accurately and with the respect they've earned, subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, ring the notification bell. These stories survive because people like you choose to keep them alive.